my first Dostoevsky, Notes from Underground. Even though it's just a short novella, it feels like such an achievement to have finished my first Dostoevsky, like life's other firsts: kiss, sex, car, university, house. I've built up Dostoevsky, I've built up Tolstoy or James Joyce or Michel Proust, these other totemic modern writers. I've built them up so much in my mind that I'm intimidated even just to begin their books. Do you guys feel the same way too? Part of the reason why I started reading on Twitch is to hold myself accountable to actually read the books that I would probably otherwise never read. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is actually my third of such books, and I'll put a link to my other ones down below. All in all, I have to say I found Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground really accessible. It's like the gateway text, the entry-level reading for Dostoevsky. I'll delve more into it later on in the video, but summarily, the writing is powerful, it's also simple, convincing, and it's compulsive to read. The psychology is so well observed, it's complex, it's incisive, it's contradictory, like psychology often is, and the ideas, they are so intermingling with like philosophy and politics and sociology and spirituality, and they are profound and they're big and they are original. Wow. Like really? Wow. I've only cracked open just a little bit the Dostoevsky door. I get what the fuss is all about. Anyway, this is a no spoiler review of Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Like, share, subscribe.
Widely and pretty much unanimously considered one of the greatest writers of world literature, 1821 to 1881, Russian. His dad was a very religious doctor, descended from nobility, but by the time Fyodor was born, that didn't really count for much. Also, Fyodor's dad died when he was about 18. Mum was from a merchant family, and she passed away when Fyodor was about 16 years old. He also had 6 other siblings, and altogether they lived in the paternal family home, which was actually in the grounds of the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor. So you can just imagine the kind of visibility Dostoevsky got of the different social classes at the time in Russia. As is usually the case with these great writers, Fyodor was introduced to literature at a really young age. In fact, his nanny, Anna Frolovna, was very influential to him. From the age of 3, she used to recount to him like heroic stories, folklore stories, fairy tales, legends. When he was 4 years old, his mother began teaching him how to read and write using the Bible. And he was read to nightly. People like Pushkin, people like Homer, Walter Scott, Anne Radcliffe, Goethe, Schiller. He was particularly influenced by Nikolai Gogol. As a kid, Fyodor was physically fragile. He even had schizophrenia, and the symptoms started to get worse around the time of his dad's death, so when he was about 18. He's been described as passionate and cheeky, a pale, introverted, overexcitable romantic. He was sent to French boarding school, and then a Russian boarding school, and then a military school, which he hated because science and engineering really wasn't his thing. He was more into literature. And he just kind of defaulted into a military career, but he also always wanted to write. So he was writing at the time anyway, and he published his first book in 1846, and it was called Poor Folk. It was met with commercial and critical success, and this critic, and this is a great name, called Vissarion Belinsky, called it the first social novel. So naturally, he then resigns, and his next novel, The Double, was published in 1846, but it was met with negative reviews. As a consequence, he started having worse seizures because of his schizophrenia. He was still able to make ends meet though by submitting short stories like White Nights and The Landlady to various different publications. And it was around this time when he was in his like mid to late 20s that he was introduced to communism. And that led to his 5-year Siberian exile from 1849 to 1854. And then once back from his exile, he's just on track to be a bona fide writer. He got married 2 times, unfortunately, because his first wife passed away the year that Notes from Underground was published in 1864. But after that, it's just bangers galore. Crime and Punishment, 1866. The Idiot, 1868 to 1869. It was published in a periodical first. Same with Demons, 1871 to 1872. And also The Brothers Karamazov, 1879 to 1880. So now, Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this book. Fiction as a weapon for ideological discourse. It challenges nihilism. It challenges rational egoism. It challenges determinism, utilitarianism, and free will. It takes on politics and sociology of the time. It takes on the artificiality of culture and the paralysis of quote unquote modern man in society. Like, it tries to make sense of the human condition. All very interesting. All also very academic. I didn't have any of that background going into Notes from Underground. As usual, I just started it blind. And having finished it, yeah, I can see all of that. But commenting on that sort of stuff is not really my forte. I just don't know enough about it. I'm more about the joys of reading, what the experience of reading whatever book was like. So anyway, Notes from Underground, the novella, is split into 2 parts. In the first part, the unnamed protagonist, who some critics call the underground man, he's going on a rant, and it is an epic and tremendous rant, and he hates himself. He finds himself despicable and vile and repulsive and ugly and arrogant, and yet the underground man considers himself better than others. He's smarter than others. The underground man is more cultured, more capable, more self-aware, more deserving. And he justifies all of this to himself as well, knowing the contradictions and knowing how ironic it is. And he just embraces it all. So you can probably already see now how the psychological ideas are quite deep and they're very intense, but also it is written in a first-person point of view, first-person narrative, in like a confessional kind of style. And Dostoevsky's writing is powerful, it's compelling, and it just produces a momentum of its own that I was just mesmerized by reading it, and then mesmerized by the scale of the ideas. They're 3D, both depth and width. And I was like, is he talking about me? And I said this so many times in the intros to, the videos where I'm reading it. I was like, am I a horrible person? But the fact that he gets me to ask that question in a very reactive, emotional way, it's like he's pulling the question out of me. These are thoughts that I've had, but then denied to myself that I've had them. It's like I didn't want to face them myself. And he just nails it. In the second part, that's Underground Man. In the second part, gives us examples of how his behavior manifests in his day-to-day life in various episodes, all of which are cringe, but to a terrifying level. I mean, original British Office David Brent cringe. Do you remember when you actually first saw that, like how you felt? How raw and borderline offensive it was, because it felt so real and it felt so personal. I did not know, and I distinctly remember this, I did not know I was watching a comedy. I did not know whether this was satire or not. Well, Notes from Underground is decidedly not a satire. That first-person point of view confessional style really elevates the effect of what Dostoevsky is going for. Ricky Gervais wrote The Office. Ricky Gervais played David Brent. Imagine if it was David Brent, the character, who wrote The Office and played himself specifically for the purpose of demonstrating how cringe he actually is. I want you to just imagine now how self-righteous and how self-loathing David Brent would have to be to do that, to figuratively walk up the gallows, proud, and tie the noose around his neck, smiling at you, and then pulling the lever and just hanging there with an expression of, I told you so, just vindicated. Isn't that terrifying? That's what does. So I'm on a disturbing books kick at the moment. I'll put a link to my review of Hurricane Season down below. And what that usually means is violence and acts committed by or against characters, with or without their consent, and they're usually very gruesome. Or even just unfair, like there's no justice in the world. And yeah, at times even I was just like, oof, that's a bit much. But there is this one interaction. Actually, it's like a prolonged episode that recounts. And it's none of those things I just mentioned. It's not violent, it's not gruesome, but it brought me to the point of tears. And I think you can actually see it in the video when I'm reading it. Jesus, the humanity, like really, literally, the humanity, that what it isness to be human, that is denied. That is challenged. It's revoked. It's not acknowledged. It's even erased knowingly and with full awareness of the impact of the action. It's gut-wrenching. It's terrifying. When philosophers mention the word terror, this is what I think they're talking about. But at the same time, it's so hard to describe because it's also beautiful. Like this character carries on living, kind of like how we carry on living. And like Dostoevsky was able to write something like this. It's incredible. You've got to read it.
Like, share, subscribe.